So, everybody digesting their food? Feeling nice and sleepy now? Close your eyes. Probably the worst thing you could say is, first I said I'm an economist, so of course you would fall asleep right away, but I'm actually not an economist. I don't have a degree in economics, so not an economist. So maybe I'll have some credibility. So poverty and wealth, the unexpected. Well, you know, I want to start out with a story, because for me this is something that happened to me about 20 years ago, and about everything I've learned about the work I do has been from the students I've had over the last 30 years. And this is no difference. And this story is one that always comes back to me. It's a story that is a symbol in my mind for really, and this is I think what you're hoping for, Kathleen, that we would tie into the other speakers that was mentioned by Gary and just by Ryan right now. And that is, you know, change is hard. Change is hard. I mean, Gary just said, go eat organic food. I mean, do you really think everybody in this room is going to go out and change their buying habits tomorrow? Gary's a good guy, but change is hard. Ryan wants us to make a mess. Is everybody going to go home and make a mess now? We even believe him. Great talk, right? But are you going to make a mess? You are not going to make a mess, because change is hard. Here's how I learned change is hard. Broccoli versus potatoes. So what I hope is when you leave today, the one thing that you'll remember from what I'm saying is, are you a broccoli person or a potato person? So about 20 years ago, I was invited by one of my students to come to the state of Maine. He was working with the State Department of Agriculture. And the State Department of Agriculture had done an interesting study. What they had found was that the potato industry wasn't doing that well. But Maine had been very dependent on potatoes. A lot of people farm potatoes. But the Department of Agriculture was doing its work, and what they found was that sales for potatoes were going down. And sales for potatoes were going down for two reasons. They were going down because, number one, with the formation of the NAFTA agreement, potatoes were coming across the border from Canada, and people thought potatoes grown in Prince Edward Island were higher quality. And they were also lower price. Oh, this sounds like economics now. Sorry about that. But they were lower price. And another thing was happening, maybe Gary's right, that people were starting to eat healthier. And there was more information that potatoes weren't really that healthy. It wasn't, even though it was a vegetable, it wasn't a healthy food. And so they had done this study, and they found that demand was declining for potatoes. Additionally, they had done some soil studies and looked at consumer patterns of eating, and they found that broccoli was a good fit. That broccoli was something that, number one, the soil and climate conditions in Maine could support the growth of broccoli, and all those people down in Boston were eating more broccoli, you know, because all the healthy eaters and that sort of thing. So I went to this meeting, and he invited me to come in here because he had done some of this work. And he said, why don't you come in here? So I came, and I was a little bit late getting to Augusta. And I came and sat in the back row and sat next to a guy, and they gave their presentation. It was a pretty good presentation. It was pre-PowerPoint, but they had these nice little charts, you know, picture of broccoli with a line going up, picture of potatoes with a line going down. They were talking to a bunch of farmers, and they were saying, so here's what you ought to do. Stop growing potatoes and start growing broccoli. And here's what the state's going to do. We're going to help you do it. We've done the soil tests. We're going to send out our extension agents. We're going to help get the seeds. We're going to help make the market. We're going to look at the transportation. This is a way that you can improve your economic well-being. See, the state is adding value. And it was a good presentation, and it came to an end. And I turned to the guy next to me. The guy next to me, pretty obviously a farmer. Actually, my father grew up on a farm, and you could tell as soon as you shook the guy's hand he was a farmer, because, you know, he worked with his hands and all that. And I said to him, so what'd you think of the presentation? And he said, you know what I'd do if I won $1 million in the lottery? And they thought, well, you know, guy wasn't paying attention that much, you know. But, you know, as someone who was born and raised in the Midwest, I was taught by my parents and everyone else that it's extremely important to be polite no matter what. So, of course, I said to him, well, no. Well, what would you do if you won $1 million in the lottery? And he said, I'd keep growing potatoes until I ran out of money. Right? It didn't matter if he had the facts in front of him. It's hard to change. Change is hard. People can stand up here and tell you to make a mess. People can stand up here, and by the way, I agree with, actually, I didn't even need that advice, because my house is a disaster. Boy, Ryan, if all those things were really true, God, we'd have the most creative family in the world. But maybe we just aren't making enough of a mess. But, you know, he's right. You can't argue with him. What's unexpected? I'm going to get back to broccoli. Broccoli is just a framework for thinking about the stuff right now. The unexpected is the poor repay their loans, right? That's what we've learned over the past few years. In Africa and Bangladesh, a lot of you have heard of Muhammad Yunus. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006 for founding the Grameen Bank, where millions of primarily poor women borrow money to improve their livelihoods with a repayment rate of 98%. Think of all the banks in the United States that would have loved the repayment rate of 98% over the last few years. So we make a lot of loans to people who we think have a lot of money and they don't repay them, but the unexpected is the poor repay their loans. We know that. This is Ryan, not just kidding. This might be me. I had a fascination with money, not wanting a lot of it, but just how did it work? And my very first experience of it was my first job in college, after college. Well, it's actually during college. It was my last year in college. And I was on the board of a small cooperative organization. I was on the board because I lived in a cooperative house and we were allowed to have a board member. Each of the member cooperatives had a board member. It was a fairly large board. And you know, you've seen on the cartoons those things, how people volunteer, where everybody's standing in a line and they ask for a volunteer and everyone else takes a step back and you're still the person standing there, and so you're assumed to be the volunteer. So I volunteered to be on the board. Later the guy left and I volunteered, the guy who's the executive director, to become the executive director. And part of what we were supposed to do, by the way, my salary was $100 a month plus free room in one of the cooperatives that I lived in. And my idea was, since we're supposed to develop cooperatives, that we would develop more cooperative housing and we would, you know, buy houses and turn them into cooperatives. So I started out, you know, it's one of these first days on the job. Think about your first day on the job and, you know, what you did. You ever do that? Think about you walk into the office. This is when there was no one there. And you sit down, and even though there was a job description and all that, you're thinking, well, now what do I do? You know, like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. Nobody trained me. I didn't know what to do. And so I figured, well, let's buy houses. So a few weeks later, I was looking through the ads in the paper, and I saw a house. It was really in a neighborhood that we wanted to build cooperative housing in. And I went to look at the house, and it was perfect. Then I went back to my office, one room in a church basement. You know, it had a desk, this little, give me a timeline, a mimeograph machine. How many people remember mimeograph machines? This is a young crowd, you know, only Catherine, you're the only person who, besides me, remembers mimeograph machines. Well, it's good that it's a young crowd. Well, you know, they were sort of pre-Xerox machines, and the stuff, remember, it smelled great, right? Mimeograph machines. And a typewriter. Catherine, you and I are the only ones who remember typewriters, too. Okay, and a typewriter. Then I opened our top desk drawer and took the checkbook out, and it was $3.43. I thought, gee, not even enough to pay my salary this month. I'm a little nervous. But he only wanted $15,000 down payment on the house. So I figured, how do I raise $15,000? I went to the library, went to the business section. This is how I ended up in this area, and found a book on corporate bonds. And in the back of the book was one of these offering statements, a sample one that was a securities offering that said, this is how corporate bonds work. This is how corporations raise money, like IBM and all that, how they raise money in the financial markets. And I thought, perfect. We're a corporation. We'll issue bonds. And I went back and I studiously typed word for word the words in the bond offering, except I substituted our name, called a board meeting to show you how sophisticated our board was, and I told them, guess what, we're selling bonds. They all said, brilliant idea, really brilliant idea. And we actually, made copies of them, said, ask your parents, your friends, your kids, anyone who has money. All you do is take their money, fill in the amount of money on the form, give them the form, and then give me the money. And they're saying, sounds like a great idea. We'll do it. Hey, and we started to get some money. About a week later, this is where this picture comes in, our lawyer calls and said, Michael, I'm going to ask you something, and I hope the answer is no. Someone told me that you're selling bonds and taking money from people. And I said, well, yes. And he said, have you ever heard of the term securities fraud? I said, I know what fraud is. What's a security? And he said, well, there are laws that are aimed to protect people in the general public from people like you. And this is what you're going to look like if you don't return all of that money right now, get every one of those bond securities back and tear them up and call me tomorrow and say that it's all done. And yet what I was thinking about was, why? I hadn't lied to them. It was money to do exactly what we said we were going to do, buy a house. I had calculated the numbers. We could afford it. Every one of them could be paid back. But it was against the law. Why was it against the law for people to knowingly invest in something they could actually see? Think about the irony of this in today's markets, right? You're actually investing in something in your own community that you can see that people are paying money for, and that's illegal. But collateralized debt obligations, those are legal. Where you buy stuff that you don't even know what it is. The people selling it don't know what it is. And then it fails and the economy collapses and we're saying, oh, must be those poor people. But poor people repay loans even here in New Hampshire. We have the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, which actually, with advice of lawyer and issuing the proper securities, following proper securities regulations, takes money from individuals in New Hampshire and invests them in projects like manufactured housing. Now, you probably think manufactured housing looks like this, but actually, it looks like that. Do you know that in New Hampshire today, there are 100, well, I should say we're hoping to close on our 100th, but there are 99 manufactured housing parks that are now cooperatively owned, financed by the loan fund. The people who live in them make sure that they look nice. Those loans have been made over the last few years to people who are not wealthy people. How many of them do you think have been delinquent or default of those 100 loans made by the loan fund over the last 3 years? The answer is 0. 0. They're all paying. Why? We thought poor people didn't repay their loans. Not only do they repay, but they interact with each other more. They fix up their places. They build common facilities. They build bonds among each other that didn't exist before because now they're owners. They're not just renters of the land that they live on. So it's a great idea, but here's my frustration. We do a lot of stuff well in the United States to try and address people's problems. Everything from child care to homeless shelters to community development finance institutions like the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. but our models for doing it don't allow us to build it into something that's scale. In the nonprofit sector, what we're told is the way you build scale is you take something that's a good idea and then you replicate it over and over again. But that's not how businesses reach scale. Businesses reach scale by growing and expanding and getting more capital, not by taking a little thing and replicating it. So we got inspiration. How can social enterprise achieve scale? And started thinking about how can we move what the loan fund is doing to the entire United States, and created an entity called Rock USA that would create a network that would do all of this. But we needed inspiration to grow to this size and make an idea that worked really well here with no defaults. We had to grow a new way. So instead of doing replication, what's the new way? We still think it's important to have small, locally based organizations. Local governance is good. How do you maintain local governance and still grow big? How do you keep local people involved but reach a scale where you actually have an impact, where homelessness goes down, where quality childcare goes up? Well, interestingly, we got inspiration from Howard Brodsky. He was introduced by a mutual friend, and he didn't talk about his company, but he set up a situation where essentially the model here is you build a platform that supports all these companies. So over here you have companies that are small retail companies, individually owned, that sell carpet, lights, and all that, like Joe's Carpet One in Saugus. But they're all connected by a network that does purchasing, marketing, everything all together. Howard's company is a $10 billion company. And we thought, hey, why not do that for nonprofits? Child care centers struggle. When we interviewed child care people, what we found is they spent more time filling out forms, figuring out how to balance their books, trying to purchase the stuff they need than they did at the stuff they're good at, which is taking care of children. So the idea we're trying to do now is build on that, saying, what if we had a platform that was based on that model where local businesses collaborated? This is the idea we're working on. Build collaborative businesses. We know how to provide quality child care. How do we make sure those are viable businesses where people actually take care of children rather than filing forms with the state to comply? That's what we're trying to do. This is the big idea. The big idea is how do we take what we do well? Instead of looking at replication, how do we build big ones? Walmart didn't think, oh, we build a little Walmart here, we'll replicate, replicate, replicate. They built systems, and that's what we need. Maintain local organizations, local housing organizations, have local governance, have people involved democratically, but build a business model where they all collaborate, where training is shared, where purchasing is shared, where access to financing is shared. These sorts of things can work. So my final point is we need to think big at the beginning. When we're thinking of how do we solve problems, the unexpected is poor people do repay loans. But we need to be aligned with this concept of scalability. We need to take our ability to solve problems and think about how we build the systems to solve them so actually all the people who need childcare or who need housing or who need access to resources that nonprofits provide have that access. So we're not just solving a little problem. There's nothing wrong with that, but we need to do better. We need to change the way we think. And the winner is broccoli, right? The winner is broccoli. But remember, the guy didn't want to grow broccoli. He wanted to grow potatoes until all his money ran out. So my final point today is broccoli. So when you leave this room today and you think broccoli, or you go to the supermarket to buy organic broccoli tonight, what you're thinking is, yeah, we can do broccoli. Yeah, we got to do it differently. That's what we got to do. Thank you.